Welcome back to the Krown Crypto channel. It is the day after Bitcoin's nice little breakout from the same range that we have been looking at since all of December. And I wanted to follow up on some of the higher term timeframe setups and even actually medium term timeframe setups that are now starting to not just confirm, but also conform together and create sort of the more likely scenario that we're looking at for the next, I would say, two to maybe 3.5 weeks, something like that. So I want to start to put all the puzzle pieces together as these puzzle pieces start to become more and more, I suppose, solidified. And without further ado, we can just jump right into the chart view right in over here. We'll start off first with this chart. I'm already on the wrong one, but I always want to remind myself of the statistics day by day. And Tuesday is a very particular day because it is the most likely to be bullish for Bitcoin day. If we look at all daily closures in Bitcoin's history, it's the one that has had the most positive closures at 58.33% of all Tuesdays closing positively, for an average positive return of 2% or just over 2%, an average negative return for the negative days at just under 2% really as well. If we take today's open and were to add on about 2%, what would that look like in terms of price action? That would look like just around about $48,000 if Bitcoin were to play at a pullback today, although I think that we've kind of already seen the pullback. If there is going to be one, it would actually be the low of the day already, which is $46,000. So I would say today, as far as the downside price action, we probably have already seen the downside as far as like absolute value is what that's going to be going. To the low $46,000 territory. Could Bitcoin close below there? I mean, that would start to call things into a little bit of question, but ultimately, as long as Bitcoin is above basically today's low on a closing basis, $46,000, we can just make that an even number there. This breakout very likely does get continuation. Maybe not necessarily today, although by statistically speaking, it is quite likely, but very likely throughout the rest of this week. And then we can start to reference some actual setups that we have been looking at over the past few weeks here. One of them was actually only relevant as of the past, I believe, week. We found this one. This was coming in from, let me just get rid of this. This was coming in from, 3rd of January. So last Wednesday. This one fired off. We called it out, I believe, Thursday or Friday, in the sense that at $43,000, there was a higher probability of an upside move based off this 4-hour setup right here. In this case, this was a 4-hour setup based off of, I believe, an HPDR band setup. Yeah, it was an HPDR volatility scalp. And we can go ahead and look at the strategy tester. It did have a just over 67% probability to play out to the upside. In this case, it looks like that's very likely going to be happening as well. And if we go into the performance summary, we want to be aware of what the average winning trade kind of looks like on this one. Keeping in mind that it can also be, significantly more than this. But if we do look at it over here, about 4%, or actually literally just on the dot at 4%. So if we were to add 4% from that entry, what would that kind of look like in terms of price action? Actually, we would have already seen that average taken at about $45,000. So fair enough there. We have seen certainly ones that are on the higher end of this, and this one very likely will be that. The reason why I say that is because the take profit metric on this one is waiting for PMARP to get above 70 percentile on the moving average for it. There's my bot slave in the background. Keep on doing your work, you little fuck. Sorry. Highly unprofessional, and as we can see right here, it's still got a little bit of room there to go. So that one will be closing relatively soon, but that was only relevant for a 4-hour time frame. If we start to look at the higher term time frames relative to that, the 2-day setup is now active. We did see a reset on volatility that was basically near the end of December / last week, and now it is very obviously expanding as Bitcoin does close above the range highs, and we can see that the 2-day time frame stochastic oscillator is going to be position to the upside. As we spoke about yesterday, that was going to happen as long as Bitcoin was above, I believe it was 43,600 or 43,700. And yeah, 43,700, 43,800 right here. So it does look like this one is going to be validated, and now we can start to apply these statistics here in a more measured way. So whenever we've seen this setup, and this setup is essentially extreme lows on 2-day time frame volatility coupled with the direction of the stochastic oscillator to the upside. So we're only looking at upside crosses here. On volatility expansion, we found that there's been 21 prior times that this has happened to the upside again. in Bitcoin's history. 17 of those times did fall through. 4 of those times were failures, meaning that they went the other way. But that did have a pretty high win rate, and it looks like it's going to get one more added on to that. So now we can start to reference the amount of days that we expect this to take and the average return we expect this to take, and look at like a first standard deviation of returns that we would kind of expect from these results. And the amount of time would be about 19 days from confirmation, with a standard deviation of about a week. So, we're talking about 3.5 weeks to basically 2 weeks. So that's where I'm getting the next 2 weeks to 3.5 weeks. So we're talking about until maybe the end of this month of January. In this case, let me just double check on this one. Yeah, basically until the end of January is kind of what we're focused on now. And the average return was 27%. With the standard deviation of about 10. So that gives us a range of returns between about 17%, or a high probability range of returns between about 17%, maybe even all the way up to 37%. I think that's a lot less likely. The reason why I'll say it's unlikely is the same that I said before. When you see volatility this low, but not for that long, it's probably not going to be one of those extreme moves. It's probably going to be maybe closer to the lower end of the first standard deviation or the average. So if we do take it from the low of this base right here, thus far, we've already seen a 13% move. If we were to extend that to 17%, or about 17%, that would put Bitcoin just below $49,000. So that would be on the lower end of the first standard deviation. And of course, if Bitcoin went for the average, somewhere around 26-27%, that would put Bitcoin around $52,000 to $53,000. And if it were to go for the upper end of this, which I do think is unlikely here, especially within the next few weeks, but we'll just go over it just for statistics' sake. That we'd be looking at somewhere around about $57,000 as well. So that's kind of the areas of interest for this move up. Again, likely between I would suppose the end of next week is kind of when we expect this to happen at the soonest. And pretty much throughout the rest of January. That's kind of the high probability for finding the next major high on this particular move from this setup right here. Then we can move on to this chart over here, looking at, hey, what the fuck? All my browsers just reloaded. I don't know why that happened. I've actually not really seen that happen before. But in this case, we can see that as far as the daily HPDR bands goes, it was really CME to kind of look at it yesterday, closing well above that 50% of historical returns range highs, and also maintaining above the median on that the whole way through. So this one actually did get it right in comparison to spot, which was kind of floundering around that same area. Actually, sorry, no, I'm wrong on that. It was also maintaining it basically since last Wednesday, actually. So looking at it right here, is the breakout real? Yes. I mean, extremely likely, yes. Does it have more to go? Looking at volatility metrics, even on the daily, we see that it's, it's above average now, above 50 percentile, but this one likely has more to go, especially with low volatility reads like this. I'm looking forward to at least get into the 70 percentiles. And personally speaking, I do think that we'll probably see higher than that just because, what is this all kind of coming on the back of? Everyone knows it's the ETF that's kind of driving a lot of the volatility right now, a lot of the erratic price behavior. And so I do believe that we're probably going to see a parabolic blow off here. The question is, how high does it come in around? And I'll just again reference a lot of the things that have been seen around social media, and also just people kind of texting me and whatnot. And if you are this person who has been texting me or showing me this on social media, I'm not like trying to pick on you or anything. It's just I was getting a lot of messages and seeing a lot of things about how I want to short this damn thing right now. I want to short this thing right now and have it go to the ground. When Bitcoin was kind of trading in last week's range, somewhere around $43,000, and I think again that's still misguided. Very obviously now with the breakout yesterday, but more importantly with how we kind of recognize that how high things can kind of go over here, and then also of course in conjunction with yesterday's video, which I'm trying to find which chart did I put this on. Hopefully it was this one. Yeah, it was this one. Okay, great. When we were on yesterday's video, we were looking at past times that Bitcoin's gotten, major events, major announcements, kind of comparable to an ETF. Although an ETF is bigger. It is more important than these past events, but it gives us some sort of idea of what to be looking at. And the most recent one was of course Coinbase, right? The Coinbase IPO. And here's the thing that people just do not either understand or do not fucking talk about it. At least I don't see it talked about like at all, and it's very bizarre to me because this is just easily ascertainable information, and people should fucking know this if they were there around this time anyways. But when Coinbase when Coinbase went IPO'd, it didn't just get announced by surprise that day. No, it was announced about a month and a half before, in March. The listing was in mid-April of the same year, and from the time of the announcement to the actual listing, there was some nice upside price action, as you can see right here. It ebbed and flowed its way through, but ultimately that was like a almost 20% move from the announcement to the actual IPO. And yes, things did top on the IPO, did trade higher, almost like about a half year later, but if you are looking to play the sell the news event, you're waiting for the actual listing, and it might be a day before the listing, might be a day of the listing, might be a day after the listing, but you're really waiting for that. And until then, you kind of are at the mercy of the market if you are looking for the next major short. I'm not even saying that I would be looking to play that. But I do think that if you are that kind of person trying to think, very, very slickly and think that you're, smarter than the market, because you definitely are. It's misguided in terms of timing. Like, this is like not new information anyways. And then of course the other comparable event was CME futures for Bitcoin, which we saw announced in October of 2017 and listed in December of 2017. And throughout that time, there was basically a 3x move. Now, I don't think there's going to be a 3x move from Bitcoin's current stature, like without any major pullback or anything like that. But ultimately, once CME futures did list, it actually topped the day beforehand. So, I do still think that Bitcoin is likely to extend the rally from here based off of the setups that we looked at earlier. And then later on, probably closer to the halving date, which I believe is like April, May area, we're probably going to see a major pullback. And at that point, Bitcoin could very easily be in for like a 25 to 40% correction, pullback, crash, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But of course, it completely depends upon how high Bitcoin gets on this current rally first. And right now, that this trend is in motion. So in my experience, in my opinion, it's not wise to try to front run these things. It's not wise to try to to be the first one in the trade, because if you're even if you're first, you're wrong, right? As the old saying goes. So it completely depends on how high Bitcoin gets first, and I really wouldn't be looking for a high probability of a major top, of a major high, not necessarily a macro high. I don't think it's going to be a macro high. I don't think Bitcoin's in a macro bear market, for fuck's sake. But I do think it's probably setting up for a pretty major pullback in somewhere around the halving. So, does it get up to 50,000 first? Does it get up to, maybe it even gets up to 57,000 bucks first? I don't fucking know. But once we actually have that date in mind, assuming that there is going to be a date, assuming that there is going to be an approval, which we don't know just yet. We don't know. Despite all of the experts, telling us in the background, I think people have probably learned by now that expert is just fucking internet talk for who the fuck knows. it's like my opinion. Who's these fucking experts? But ultimately, I do think it's still best to be waiting, as this is this is the first day. Again, I'll just put this into like very intuitive terms, or hopefully intuitive terms. Bitcoin traded sideways in a nice consolidation for about a month, the whole month of December. We just had the first fucking breakout yesterday out of that range. Again, after a month of consolidation, do you think that the move is all done in just one day? Probably not. So I think I think we'll end things there. As far as that go, we went over timing, went over statistics, we went over setups, we went over the whole sell the news idea, and I think that's a good place to leave it off. As always, there should be some sort of some sort of an invalidation of this rally. If it were to fail, again, I do think it's unlikely, but of course you need to have some sort of criteria that lets you know that it is a failure, meaning that this one is destined to come down relatively hard. And I would say that's, again, below 46,000 bucks on a daily closing base. If you see that, okay, yeah, this is a fake out, and all that talk about timing is going to be thrown in my face. But until that happens, up is a direction, and maybe it doesn't necessarily continue today, although statistically speaking, kind of likely. But throughout this week, we would expect Bitcoin to trudge higher here. So I'll leave it on right there, or I'll leave it right there. And I will also let you know that we are recording this during a nice little live stream. If you want to join on in, we do these every Tuesday in the Eastern Europe in the Eastern Europor morning. We're Europors over here, no heat, and hopefully we'll see you next time. So with that said, take care, much love, and see you hopefully next Tuesday.